Yes. Oh, okay. So we had done some little bit of integration of how, but for the students, this was the same attempt. Obviously, IBM had a great infrastructure, right? And a lot of so-called miners, and so they could do a lot of text processing of the data in a very highly scalable manner and all that. And again, my company was, as you might expect, this sort of ontologies or knowledge base, domain-specific things. So we built something, and the idea was, can we improve upon all the stuff you can do with statistics and those kind of well-known techniques for IR and with something with knowledge. So that was a broad context of synergy, and we had I think a good demonstration of things together. Then it was business.
Yes, and of course I remember it because we were down visiting you on the day that www announcements came out, accepts came out. And we'd been under a publication ban for 4 years. So none of the researchers on the project had published for 4 years because of the patents and whatnot. So that we had our first paper we'd written in 4 years into www. And we were all checking our mail, and Amit said, I probably shouldn't tell you this, but you don't have to check your mail. It got accepted. And it ended up being the best paper for www that year. So it was, so yes, it
was a SEMTech paper, right?
Yep, SEMTech. So that, it made quite an impression.
That's 2003.
I think so, yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so I work at Almaden. This is one of IBM's research labs. I'd like to point out, for those of you who may have heard otherwise, we actually do get snow. However, unlike here, and I'm from the Midwest originally, the snow is a little different. It stays on the hills. If you want to visit it, you can go, but it doesn't invite itself into your home. So it's a wonderful place to work. It's one of 8 research labs IBM has, one on the East Coast at Watson, the Austin lab in Texas, one in Zurich, Haifa, at Delhi, Beijing, and Tokyo. And I bring this up because the work I'm going to be showing is not just work that I did, or even just work that our lab did. It's work that's had people contributing to it from all over the world. And it makes a big difference because different places have different perspectives, bring different ideas, and bring different solutions to problems. And it makes a big difference.
So the Bangalore is not the research lab then?
No. Okay, so what is semantic supercomputing? Well, the first thing we notice is there's lots of information. Even a mid-sized company today that does anything with finance is required to keep all their email for about 7 years. This includes all the spam. This means that a mid-sized company is going to be looking at petabytes of data that they need to have under management just to keep up with legal requirements. If you're doing anything in healthcare, you rapidly run into petabytes. If you're doing anything in just about any area, you're running into an awful lot of data. Now, this data is often in a human-readable form. It was made by people for people. And recently, I've been doing a lot of work in the medical domain and run across a fantastic term called secondary use. Has anyone heard this in the context of medicine?
Yeah, we have
there you go.
Clinical data secondary use.
Yep. So the basic idea is, there are a lot of studies that really aren't easy to do on people. So a good example of this is, what part of the brain does what. So you go and you find everyone who has had a horrible brain injury, and you look at the, the results of it, and you say, okay, they lost this part of their brain, and they lost this ability. They lost this part of the brain. Right. So that's secondary use. The data was collected, in treating this patient. Now you're trying to use it for something entirely different. And what's nice about that is this medicine has spent hundreds of years figuring out how to take data that was collected for one purpose and try to do research with it. And so they've had a lot of insights that are helpful into what we do, which is to take data that was created for humans for some purpose and reuse it for another purpose. So maybe the purpose the data was put together for was social networking or corporate communications or a press release or a page about my, my cat. We want to go and use it for something else. Finding what's popular, discovering relationships. And the important thing, the supercomputing part of it, is you have to imagine you have an unlimited amount of computation to do this. And the reason is, 8 years ago when we did WebFountain, we had 1,000 machines in a room with 2 petabytes of storage, and it was this room about the size of the one we were in this morning. And I went through last week and looked, and all of that processing and storage would fit in 2 racks, or something about the size of a refrigerator today. And that's over the course of 8 years. And I can pretty much guarantee you that in 8 more years, we'll all be carrying that much computation on our cell phones. So don't, I was talking to someone this morning who was saying, we don't have enough computation to do, no, you do, really. Don't constrain yourself by saying it would take too long to run. By the time you graduate, it'll be running in 5 minutes. So the basic text processing flow for everything. So we start with an input document. By this, it could be an image, it could be text, it could be a PDF, you name it. We then are going to create metadata around that document. Now this can be extracted information, this can be additional annotational information, it can come from all sorts of places. Now the size is important. If you go back to the early 90s, content management systems had on the order of 1 to 2% of the data in the content management system was metadata. 98-ish% was the data that was under management. Today we're finding 90% of the data is metadata. 10% is the data that's under management. You might say, well, that doesn't make sense. But then take a step back and think, what's happened to the price of storage over the last 20 years? Anyone? Processing. Displays. Down. Salaries. So every human-created document is much more expensive today than it was 20 years ago, and yet the storage to hold the metadata is much smaller. So we want to leverage anything a person creates for any reason. Let's use computers to make the most out of it, because we're paying an awful lot for that email. I don't know how many of you, much time you spend on email. A third? I mean, a third of the salaries of many large corporations goes to nothing but content creation. We then index everything, not just the input document, but all of the metadata. Even if you don't think it's at all useful, index it. It doesn't cost you, it costs almost nothing to index it these days. And once you have it, you can begin asking interesting questions. So that's the basic idea of what we do with every document on every project that we do. The way we send data back and forth is through something called UEMA. This is proof positive that IBM should never name anything. Unstructured Information Management Architecture. It's lovely. It's actually now an OASIS standard, and it just left the incubator this week on Apache. So it is a formal top-level Apache project. It is a structure by which you can write an annotator that does one thing and plug it together with a bunch of annotators written by other people to get one flow end-to-end. Mina did a fair amount of work with it through a grant a couple of years ago, but it's a nice way to reuse other people's work. Especially with a distributed research lab, it's nice to be able to call China up and say, your annotator doesn't work. It's a nice self-contained abstraction layer. It either works or it doesn't. Here's a document that'll break it. So I can take their code, I can have it generate features, I can then look at those features, create more features, and go on. So what do I mean by that? Let's say we have a sentence, Sam Palmisano spoke at the European Union meeting in Brussels last Thursday. Okay, so quiz time, wake everyone up. How would I spot the proper nouns in that? I want you to write a proper noun spotter. How are you going to write it?
All right.
Pardon?
Send, Palmisano.
No. I want you to write code to spot proper nouns. What's your algorithm going to be? You have 5 minutes to write this. What are you going to do?
I look at the structure of a sentence that I have.
Takes too long.
Capitalized
words. The one thing about this is start with the simple thing first. It might even work. So spot just the capitalized words, and you've got Sam Palmisano, European Union, Brussels, Thursday. It may not work perfectly, but it'll work well enough to let you see, is there something here worth spending the time to do a deep parse on? If you start with a deep parse, 3 months from now you will discover it doesn't work, and your PhD will now be pushed out another 3 months. Try the simple thing first, see if it works. If it does, you win. Okay, now how would I spot people? Now I'm going to give you a hint. We've got this list here. What do you know about people's names?
First and last name.
They're always what? A person's name is a proper noun, right? Do I even have to look at this? All I have to do is look at the proper nouns. If it's a name, it's going to be there, right? Very easy. Now I just write something that scans this, finds things that look like first names, and away I go, I've got people.